So yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So like I said, we've got the housing action plan.
Yep.
And so basically we're trying to figure out, what's the housing situation actually like in Duvall right now? What challenges are people facing? And what are some potential solutions?
Okay, makes sense.
And there's this story in here that really illustrates the human impact of this.
Oh, okay.
A young professional living in Duvall,
Okay.
and she's working multiple jobs
Just to make rent.
just to afford her rent.
Yeah.
And it's really impacting her quality of life. She talks about feeling trapped and stressed.
Yeah, it's hard to get ahead when you're just constantly trying to stay afloat. And, Duvall's a really charming town.
It is, yeah.
So it's attracting, young professionals who are looking for a nice place to live. But when the housing costs are that high, it makes it really tough.
Yeah. You can't enjoy all the charm if you're always working.
Exactly. It's a tough housing market out there. And I think, Duvall's kind of a microcosm of what's happening in a lot of places,
Yeah.
especially these kind of desirable small towns that are close to bigger cities.
Right. So to understand kind of how we even got here, let's look at who lives in Duvall.
Okay, yeah.
And the data shows, this was interesting to me, a really high owner occupancy rate, like 95%.
Wow. Okay.
So most people in Duvall own their homes.
Makes sense.
And we also see a lot of households with 2 or 4 people, so a lot of families, right?
There's another group that we need to talk about
Who's that?
who are often overlooked in these housing conversations, and that's the seasonal workers.
Oh, right.
So, they often struggle to find decent housing.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard stories about, like, people living in really crowded conditions or even, like, unsafe conditions because it's all they can afford.
Yeah.
So it's really important that Duvall, looks for housing solutions that benefit everyone.
Absolutely.
When we look closer at that cost burden data, almost half of those cost burdened households are families with kids.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then digging even deeper into the numbers, the report, it gets kind of technical, it uses all these different income bands.
Sure.
But the bottom line is this: Duvall's going to need more housing across all income levels by 2044.
Wow.
It's clear that, both market rate and affordable housing solutions are going to be crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that keeps coming up when we look at the community meeting notes and stuff is the idea of ADUs.
Oh, ADUs, yeah. So those are the accessory dwelling units.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The granny flats.
Yep, granny flats
Yeah.
or, converted garages, things like that. Basically separate living spaces on an existing property.
Yeah.
So that's one way to increase density without, like, totally changing the character of the town, right?
Right. So the good news is it looks like the city is trying to do just that.
Okay, good.
They put together this community survey
Right.
to get a better sense of, what people want and need when it comes to housing.
Yeah, and it's a good thing they did because it revealed some really interesting findings. So one of the big takeaways from the survey was this real desire for more diverse housing options.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, people were talking about townhomes, duplexes, even senior living facilities, things like that.
So wider range of choices.
Right. And of course, affordability was still a huge concern.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
No. But one thing that was really encouraging about this survey is that the people who responded, they pretty much matched the overall demographics of Duvall.
Oh, so it's a good representation of the community as a whole.
Exactly. So we can be pretty confident that these findings really reflect what the people of Duvall are thinking and feeling about housing.
Okay, so it's not just a small group with a very specific viewpoint.
Right. And I think, when you read through some of the comments that people wrote in the survey, the personal stories, it really hits home that this isn't just some abstract issue.
Right.
These are real families being priced out of their homes, longtime residents who are feeling squeezed, essential workers who are struggling to find a place to live.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the numbers sometimes.
It is.
But these stories really remind us that this is about people's lives. Okay, so the Housing Action Plan, it lays out some potential pathways forward.
It does.
But there are some constraints too, right?
Right. There are some things that are kind of working against them.
Yeah, like what? What are some of the biggest challenges they're facing?
Well, for one thing, Duvall has some pretty unique geographical and environmental features.
Right, like those steep slopes.
Exactly. And the areas that are prone to flooding.
Yeah.
So those things can make it tricky and expensive to build.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can't just build anywhere.
Right. And then there's the question of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Can the roads, the sewer system, the water system, can they handle a big increase in housing?
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
So those are all things that the city needs to consider carefully before making any major decisions.
So it's like a puzzle.
It is.
You got to make sure all the pieces fit together
Exact.
to create a community that's both sustainable and livable.
Right. And of course, there's the financial piece, too. Developing affordable housing, it takes a lot of resources.
Right. Money, partnerships, commitment from all the different stakeholders.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it's a multifaceted challenge. So let's talk about some of those options.
Okay.
One that jumps out from the Housing Action Plan is this idea of increasing the supply of permanently affordable housing.
Right. So that's housing that remains affordable over the long term.
Right. Not just for a few years. How do they actually make that happen?
Well, one way is through partnerships with community land trusts.
Oh, community land trusts. Okay. Remind me how those work.
Sure. So basically, a community land trust, it's a nonprofit,
Okay.
and they own the land, but they lease it out to homeowners or developers at a below market rate. And that helps to keep the housing affordable, even as property values go up around it.
So that way families don't have to worry about being priced out of their homes in a few years.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's one approach. What else are they looking at?
Things like expedited permitting processes, which can save them time and money.
So it's like a win-win.
It can be, yeah.
Developers get to build more,
Yeah.
and the city gets more affordable housing.
Right.
All right, cool. Are there any other strategies that they're thinking about?
Yeah, one that comes up a lot is inclusionary zoning.
Inclusionary zoning. Okay. Break that down.
So, inclusionary zoning basically means requiring developers to include a certain percentage of affordable units in any new development that they build.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like saying, hey, if you want to build in Duvall, you need to help us address this affordability issue.
Right. So that growth benefits everyone, not just those who can afford the market rate.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's another interesting tool.
It is. And it's one that's used in a lot of different cities.
Yeah. And then beyond just building more affordable units, it sounds like they also need to think about expanding the variety of housing options.
You're absolutely right.
Right.
Yeah, it's not just about quantity, it's also about diversity.
Yeah.
Duvall needs a mix of different types of housing.
To meet the needs of all those different households.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
From young professionals to growing families to seniors.
Folks living on fixed incomes.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into some of the specifics.
Okay.
The Housing Action Plan, it talks about exploring alternatives to the traditional single-family home.
Right.
So what are they thinking about there?
Well, one idea that's been gaining some traction is cottage housing.
Cottage housing. Okay, now what is that exactly?
So picture smaller homes, cluster together,
Okay.
often on existing lots that might otherwise only be able to support one single-family home.
Oh, so you're increasing the density,
Exactly.
but not necessarily changing like the overall look of the neighborhood.
Right. And cottage housing, it can be designed to really blend in with the existing architecture.
So it preserves that small town charm that people are worried about losing.
Exactly. And of course, there are those ADUs we talked about earlier.
Right, the granny flats and the garage conversions.
Exactly. So those offer a lot of flexibility, too.
Yeah.
Whether it's providing extra income for homeowners or creating more affordable rental options.
Right, and it seems like if the city were to, loosen some of the restrictions on ADUs,
Yeah.
that could really make a big difference.
It could.
And speaking of removing barriers, they're also looking at streamlining the permitting process,
They are.
which I imagine would make it a lot easier for people to build ADUs and other types of housing,
Exactly.
which would hopefully lead to a more diverse and affordable housing stock.
Exactly.
So it's good to see them taking these steps.
It is. And it's important to note that they're not doing this alone. They're really trying to involve the community every step of the way.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Gathering input, listening to concerns, working collaboratively.
So it's a community effort
It is.
to find solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly.
And ultimately, it's about making sure that everyone in Duvall has access to safe, affordable, and decent housing.
Well said. I agree.
Right. A
Yeah.
place to truly call home.
Absolutely. And speaking of different types of housing, there's always some debate about, which ones are best for affordability.
Oh, right. Like, what are the pros and cons of different housing approaches?
Yeah, exactly. So that's something worth digging into. So, we've got single-family homes, townhomes, duplexes, mixed-use developments, co-housing, all these different options on the table.
Right. So how do they each stack up when it comes to affordability?
Well, single-family homes, they're kind of the classic American dream, right?
Yeah.
But they can actually contribute to affordability challenges.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, because they typically take up more land, larger lots.
Right.
So that leads to lower density and can drive up the cost of land.
So focusing only on single-family homes could make housing less affordable.
It could, yeah, in the long run.
Interesting. Okay, so what about those other options, like townhomes and duplexes?
So those tend to have a more compact footprint, right? So
Yeah.
you can fit more units on a given piece of land.
Higher density.
Exactly. And that can potentially lower the construction costs per unit.
Which could translate to lower prices for buyers or renters.
Right. And then there's mixed-use developments.
Yeah, those are the ones that combine residential with commercial, right?
Exactly. So you might have apartments above shops or restaurants.
Right.
And the idea there is that by integrating those things, you reduce the need for car travel.
Oh, so people can live, work, and play all in the same area.
Exactly.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it can create a really vibrant and walkable community.
And potentially cut down on transportation costs for residents.
Exactly. Which can make a big difference for people's budgets.
Yeah, for sure. What about co-housing?
Co-housing is interesting. That's where you have, a group of people living together in a kind of intentional community,
Right.
and they share some common spaces and resources.
Like what kinds of things?
Could be things like laundry facilities, a garden, maybe even childcare.
So it's a more community-oriented way of living.
Exactly. And, that sharing can help to reduce costs for everyone involved.
So it's not just about the money, it's about building connections too.
Right, exactly. Fostering a sense of community.
So it seems like each of these housing types has its own unique advantages and challenges.
It does, yeah. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
So the key is finding the right mix for Duvall
Right, a mix that meets the needs of all the different residents.
and creates a community where everyone can afford to live.
Exactly. And, I think it's important to remember that this is an ongoing process. Duvall's going to have to continue to adapt and evolve as its needs change.
Right. But it sounds like they're on the right track, asking the right questions.
They are. They're definitely moving in the right direction. And, for our listeners out there, as you continue to explore all these documents, think about what kind of future you envision for Duvall and what role you want to play in shaping that future.
It's a conversation worth having. So keep those minds curious, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.